Welcome back. We are here for another segment of Facebook Live with Brown and Crouppen. We come at you once a week, and we try to cover the topics that you care about and you ask for. If you're not already a subscriber, take this time and subscribe to this page so that you don't miss out on any of the good stuff. Today we're going to do a great segment because I know everybody that calls into our office with a case has one question that they always ask, and that is, what is my case worth? So I brought two of our experts down today. We have Andrew McNary and Steve Duke, two of our attorneys, and we're going to tackle this question. So, what is my case worth?
Well, every case is different, and that is one of the hardest things at the outset to answer in a case. But what we can talk about are some of the different things that affect a case's value.
Okay, so what would be some of those things? Like, how does an insurance company figure out how much they're willing to pay on a case?
Well, a lot of it comes down to something that's pretty much present in every personal injury case, and that's the injury. So first it looks at, in what way was a person hurt? How are they hurt? How bad is their injury? What kind of treatment has gone into that? And a lot of the time with a severe injury, there can be a lot of medical bills, a lot of expenses that go into that. And that's always the first place that an insurance company will look, that anybody valuing a claim will look, is how badly is the person hurt.
Well, I used to hear, and I know years ago people used to say, well, you just, whatever the medical bills were, you just multiply that by 3 and that's what the case is worth. Does that have any truth whatsoever?
No. In my experience, there are several things that can drive a case's value, even in cases where there's, if there's two cases with similar injuries. It can depend on how the crash actually happened, if there's what we call any aggravating circumstances in a particular car crash. And by aggravating circumstances, I mean like texting, bad driver history, drinking, drugs, distraction. Those aggravating circumstances can drive the value of a case differently than a case that does not have those circumstances. So just multiplying the specials doesn't really give a true value.
Yeah, I can tell you, I've worked on a lot of these myself, and when I would be asked that question, what's a case worth? I would start going through the litany, and I want to know, how much were your medical bills? Of those medical bills, how much of it was just diagnostic testing versus how much was like treatment where you had to go, so many times for physical therapy or for chiropractic care or for orthopedic care, because that would make a big difference. The fact that a test happened to cost a bunch of money could be that we can get the insurance company to pay for the test, but they're certainly not going to take the cost of a test and multiply it by 3 for no good reason. I think another factor that played a big part is lost wages. And this is why, to your point, why two people with a similar injury may not have the same value case is because the idea of one of these cases is to make a person whole. So when a person gets injured, if they were earning $100,000 a year with a really good job, and because of their injury, they can't do that job anymore, or maybe they can do a different job, but the different job that they can now do is a desk job that maybe only pays $40,000 a year, that's a lot of lost income that we can recover in a case. But if a person got injured, same injury, and they were already at a desk job making $40,000, and as soon as they're done treating, they can go right back to that same job making that same money, that's a big component potentially of those damages, right?
Absolutely. And to kind of go along with what you're saying, in a case where, like you said, there's diagnostic, there's initial emergency room treatment, thank God you're okay and you never have to go back to the doctor. But you take that same exact value for somebody else that went to the doctor, maybe didn't have as much diagnostic treatment, but then spent the next 4 months going back and forth to the physical therapist 3 times a week. That intrusion into their life, into their daily routine, into time away from their family and time away from their kids and their job, that can translate to a bigger recovery than for somebody who just has that initial treatment. Exactly.
Well, let me ask you this, Steve. Talk about the difference when it comes to the recovery. A person who can make a full recovery from their injury versus a person who is not going to make a full recovery but is going to still live with some lifetime or some issue of pain. How will that affect the value?
Somebody that can make a full recovery from an injury, you're in essence looking at something with a true beginning and an end, that you can sort of figure out the entire story. But a lot of the times when you've got somebody that's injured in such a way that they may never fully recover from that injury, the story goes on for the rest of that person's life. And so that persistent injury, that persistent pain can affect them in a lot of different ways.
And if that's true, then that also means how old they are might impact the value of their claim. Because if you've got a person in their 20s that, God forbid, loses a leg in an accident, they're going to be living without that leg or with a prosthetic for the next 50 years. Mm-hmm. Whereas if that same thing happened to a person who was already 75, while it still is going to have tremendous value, they may only be living without that leg for, say, 10 years. And so that'll make a difference as well. What other intangibles? You had mentioned earlier drunk driving or texting and driving. You know, why does that make the claim automatically more valuable? If the car accidents that happens in the same manner, the injury is the exact same, your lost wages are the exact same, why is it that getting hit by a drunk driver or a texting driver automatically makes that case more valuable?
Well, we don't want to say it's because we punish the bad actors, but in a way that is kind of the theory behind why those cases are worth more. If a accident or a crash is preventable and is simply the fault of someone's bad decision making and bad behavior, obviously those cases, when they get in front of a jury, can have a different spin or a different appeal to them when people are valuing damages. So even, you know, if a case isn't filed and we're talking about the reasonable value of the case, those things can drive the value.
Right. I do think that's what it is. I think you anticipate what a jury is going to look at. And if you have just, you know, a nice old lady who is driving along, going the speed limit, but maybe loses her attention for a moment and rear ends somebody, you know, a defendant like that is going to have a lot of sympathy. People are still going to hold her accountable for the damages she caused, but they're not going to feel that instinct to really want to tag her. Whereas if that's, you know, some young person driving wildly, drinking, not paying attention, doing drugs, and they slam into somebody, that jury is not going to be as sympathetic to what their actions were. And they're going to be more inclined, I think, to award a lot more money. I mean, you feel the same way?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So what else? What else is out there that people may want to know about to figure out, you know, how we come to a number? Let's talk about what we think appropriate settlement is. I mean, there's a difference between the amount of money that you might be able to get if you went all the way through a trial and left it up to a jury, but that may not be the same amount of money that you might recommend to a client that they should accept as a settlement. So talk about that just a little bit, because obviously whether something goes to trial or whether something gets settled also has an impact on the value. Now talk about that.
Well, when we're deciding what a good settlement value is versus a case that we're going to take all the way to trial because we want to see what the verdict's going to be, we're looking at things like, is the amount offered to settle, would you still put the same in your pocket in your best day of trial? So, you know, trials are very expensive. It can take 2 to 3 years from the time we file a case to the time we actually get to verdict. And, you know, we need experts, we expend a lot of cost. So that's why sometimes the settlement value can be lower than maybe your best day, because if you average out what you would get today versus what you would get 3 years with those additional costs, then oftentimes clients may want the money now.
Right. And trial is a risk. I don't care how good your case is. You know, if you try the exact same case 10 times, you're going to get 10 different results, period. You may have 1 or 2 that are very similar. I would say if you try, no matter how good the case is, you try a case 10 times, if you're doing the math, you have to know that at least 1 out of those 10 times, at least 1, and statistically it's closer to half, you're going to lose. You're going to lose your case at trial. And the other 5 times where you're going to win, it could be wildly different amounts depending on the type of jury you get. So to me, part of making the determination whether to recommend a settlement is always thinking about what are those various outcomes that could happen at trial, how much risk is really involved, And then you really are empowering the client, because at the end of the day, it's the client's case. And our job as attorneys is to educate the client as to all of the things that could happen at trial so that they can appreciate the risk, much like a doctor would talk to a patient about the risks of a surgery. And then it really becomes the client's choice to say either, I want to take this where there's guaranteed money and I get it quicker. I don't want to gamble with that money on the chance that maybe I just get a little bit more. What else am I missing there? Anything else you can think of?
I mean, there's a lot of the times just, like Andrea mentioned, sometimes trials from the beginning of a claim to when a verdict is reached can be several years. And a lot of the time there are things going on in a person's life that it just may make sense for them to deal with it quicker. I mean, especially if it's impacted their job, it's impacted their quality of life, that it just makes more sense to get a result and get them the help that they need and the compensation they need earlier on in the case.
Right. And I have always felt like insurance companies will go out of their way to delay things in the hopes that a client, needs that money. I mean, we'll have clients who they need to have ramps installed at their home so that they can take a wheelchair in and out, and nobody's giving them that money to pay for that. They're not going to have a chance to install what they need in their home until they resolve their claim. And like you say, if that goes on for years, what are they supposed to do? So the client's circumstances, from what I'm hearing, is now another factor that determines how much a case is worth. The more a client's able to hold out and not sort of be desperate for the money allows the attorney more time to negotiate, maybe get a higher amount. The more desperate they are, you may possibly shortchange their case a little bit, but for good reason.
Yeah, and the best that we can do for every client, and this is what we try to do for everybody, is just give them and arm them with the facts they need to make an informed decision. We try to make it to where you could get this today, or we can take this risk, and here's how we're going to calculate the risk. But ultimately, you're in the driver's seat. You make the call, you call the shot of whether we settle or we go forward.
Yeah, I always thought it was like Star Trek. I tell people, I'm like, you're Captain Kirk. You're going to make the decisions, but I'm Spock. I'm the logical one. I'm going to give you everything you need to know so that you can assess the situation. But at the end of the day, I mean, it is their case, it's their life, it's their pain, their injury, and they get to decide to accept or not accept.
And there's definitely times that we have to file and try those cases.
Which we don't mind doing, because if people want to have their day in court, we'll get it for them. Absolutely. My experience is what they really want is just to be treated fairly. And if we can squeeze the insurance company to the point where they finally break down and treat our client fairly, that usually gets the claim resolved.
Absolutely.
All right, well, listen, if you have any questions you'd like to see answered for future segments, put them in the comments section. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe. Otherwise, have a delightful weekend.